Good sticks, everyone. Welcome to the Captain Avalanche Fancast, all things Colorado Avalanche hockey and more from a fan perspective. Hosted by me, Captain Avalanche Corey, and our local Sharks expert, Dom. Now, we're no insiders. We're not inside the locker room face-to-face with our favorite players, but we hope to create a relatable and welcoming environment because we're just like all of you listening. Fans. Fans with a deep passion for the game of hockey, and in this case, the Colorado Avalanche. Now, slow it down. Who am I? Well, I'm Corey. Captain Avalanche. Now, how did I come to love the game of hockey? Well, I always go back to the story of my mom, who was the biggest sports fan in my house for forever and even now. And whenever she used to go to Avalanche games, she would always text me a long, all-cap string of Landeskog whenever Gabriel Landeskog would score a goal. And I think that just resonated with me. And of course, she would always have hockey on TV whenever it was on in the regular season. And I really remember starting to watch back in 2016, 2017, I would say, when the Penguins were winning their back-to-back Stanley Cups. And I think I really locked into the Avalanche, embarrassingly enough, on their league worst or their cap era worst season, where they only scored, correct me if I'm wrong, Dom, 48 points? Was it 48 points in the season?
I would have to double check that one. I don't recall the exact amount. It does sound correct though.
It sounds, I think it was 48 points. I will double check that while you're giving your intro, but that from there, I think I've fallen more and more in love with this team and this sport every year. And now it's led me to this point right now where I get to host a hockey podcast with one of my great friends, Dom. Speaking of which, Tom, you're not a Colorado Avalanche fan by nature, are you?
No, I'm happy to root for the home team when they aren't going up against my beloved Sharks, but I am the Northern California born and raised, so we represent the Teal Nation out there in San Jose.
And Dom, how did you come to love hockey? How did you come to love the Sharks?
Well, my father was always a big hockey fan. He played some roller hockey as a goalie himself. So that was something I always had in my childhood, playing out in the street in the cul-de-sac with him, learning how to skate backwards. To this day, I still skate faster backwards than forwards, but that's what you get when you learn from a defensive-minded and goalie as a coach. But what really introduced me to the Sharks was going to games with him. There have only been a few that I had gone to in the tank as a kid, but some of them were my greatest memories. One of which was for my birthday, my 14th birthday, going to the tank. And it's when I first ever got a player to sign and get a player autograph for something. And I got multiple of them, including Brent Burns, who's still to this day one of my favorite guys to watch play. And so that was just a really core memory experience with my dad. But beyond that, I think the real origin story has to be the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the San Jose Sharks. He wrote that when I was a kid as a joke, but it became every time, particularly for playoff games, but anytime we'd watch the Sharks play, we would put the flag, which was tied to and mounted on a hockey stick that we sanded down to be able to fit in the flagpole. Holster, and we'd put it out and say the pledge before every time the Sharks would come on the ice. So that tradition, I think, is when you do that every time there's a game as a kid, it's hard to not become a fan for life.
No kidding. Wait, can you recite it?
Oh, absolutely. I'd be happy to. Do you think the fans would like that?
I want to hear it. I don't care what everybody else wants to hear. I want to hear this.
Alrighty, well, here goes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the San Jose Sharks and to the club for which it stands, one team on the ice, unbeatable, with penalties and slap shots for all.
That is fantastic. Oh my goodness.
We might not be unbeatable these days, but that pledge to this day remains undefeated.
I was going to say, in your heart, you're still unbeatable with a pledge like that. We need to get that out there. Everybody who's back in California, if you listen to this, you need to start using that now. If you have a San Jose Sharks flag, that's what's going to propel your team to victory. Not Macklin Celebrini. No. The Sharks Pledge of Allegiance. I love it. Oh,
I mean, happy to share that with you. We
same.
can't discount Celebrini, and I'm looking forward to talking about him sometime here soon.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, definitely bring that pledge home. And for those of you who aren't Sharks fans, I still encourage you as hockey fans to maybe create your own or modify it to fit your team, because we are, as this sport, we are all fans, like Corey said.
And Dom, I think that leads me well into think what we hope to accomplish with podcast. And it's something I was telling you before we started that I've been wanting to do for a couple seasons now, especially after Cup win, hoping for another here soon. But I realized every year that my passion for hockey has continued to grow, and I want to share that with people. And not only do I want to share the passion for hockey, but for my favorite team, the Colorado Avalanche, in a relatable way, because obviously I'm not an insider, but I'm a homer, and Dom will be here to help get me back to earth in case I get too high. But I genuinely, whenever I'm having conversations with new people, I think they always identify my Avalanche dog tag. They ask me, "So you like the Avs, huh?" And that's pretty much the end of it for them, because I'll be going on about the Avs for about as long as they'll allow me to. So it's pretty rare that I find people equally as passionate for hockey or willing to listen to everything that I have to say, which is why I'm so glad I met you back in freshman year of college. I never met somebody who was equally as passionate about hockey. So it's great. And I'm glad that you were able to do this with me. And I hope we can keep doing this and it becomes easier, more natural as we go along. So I guess with that in mind. Oh, yeah. But to expand a little bit more, I hope to introduce the game of hockey to more people as well. And I want to help grow this sport because to me, it will always unequivocally be the greatest sport on earth. It's the fastest sport on two legs. And I think the athletes are really the best out of any sport. And I will die on that hill, respectfully. I'll also let everybody know.
Absolutely.
Exactly. I'll also let everybody know this is likely not a family show. I will use some naughty words. I will try and always be articulate and well spoken. However, anybody who's met me knows that I'm a pretty emotional guy and I get pretty heated, elated, every kind of high and low emotion that you can think of. So be prepared for that. But Tom, now that you're here, what what do you hope to accomplish by being on this podcast?
Well, I completely agree with you, Corey. I think the sport of hockey does not get enough recognition, particularly in the United States. When you have sports like the NFL and the MLB with baseball and the NBA, they have such high salary caps, so much money, so much advertising revenue, and they grow such a big following. Here you have this sport in hockey, like you said, the fastest sport on two legs, where they don't have constant timeouts and breaks in the action, and you have just as much, if not more, contact than you have in football. It is a physical sport. It is really exciting to watch and fast paced. You don't have that issue of breaks like you see in baseball where they're trying to speed the game up. The game is fast on its own, and if anything, we wish it would go on longer. So I think hockey is absolutely something that needs more recognition. And I guess my other goal is I'm happy to chat here and keep learning. I'm a fan like you, Corey. I've always been a hockey fan, always been a Sharks fan, but I'm really excited at the opportunity of this podcast to learn more and do more research on my end to share with you and to share with anybody who is interested in listening and share the wonders of the sport of hockey. I would love to see it grow and love to see the players get paid a bit more fairly for the risks they take of injury as compared to other sports. So I think those are some long-term goals outside of the podcast as well.
Definitely. And ultimately, I would love to work in hockey. My ultimate goal is hockey ops, which is a high and lofty one because I never played the sport. And I frankly really didn't find my love for professional sports in general until much later in life. Obviously, if I could go back and change it, I would. But all I can do is keep moving forward and try to create something now. And that's why I'm here and that's why I'm super excited. And I mean, I feel like the goals of the podcast will hopefully grow and evolve, but I think we always want to maintain a connection to the people just like you and me who are the fans and bring in those new people. And which is why I hope we can set up a point where people can connect with us, ask us questions. We can help explain things about hockey that were maybe confusing to us when we first started learning the sport, tell people about the stuff that we think is really cool, and hopefully offer some insightful analysis and opinions into other aspects of the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that those are great goals of the podcast, and I'm sure. I don't think it's if, it is when that you are in the world of hockey as a career, Corey. You've committed so much of yourself to this and are a true fan. I think it would be almost a heroic story when you are part of an organization and helping spread hockey even further to the masses. But in the meantime, yeah, let's provide analysis. Let's help be there as a line of information or just as a safe space to chat hockey because that's something that I think the world needs more of.
Thank you, Dom. You're too kind. I did tell Dom before this episode that he'll likely have to carry it through because, of course, right before we had been planning this for about a week, and right before the first episode, I of course have come down with some form of illness, which is of no surprise. Dom is now wanting to call it the Korth principle, which is fantastic. So forgive me if I have any brain fog. Also, would like to reclarify. I did look; it was 48 points. It was a salary cap era worst 48 points. In the
2016 and in
2016
2012, the true worst was 39 points.
Oh my goodness. Who was that?
2012, that would have been 39 total points, 150 goals
No,
against. That would have been
which
when you
team
were
was
fifth
that?
in the Northwest, the Colorado Avalanche.
Wait, oh goodness. What?
The
Oh.
last year before your move to the Central and the realignment of divisions back when there was still a Northwest. We'll go with your 48 because we don't need to remember that it was worse.
It hit me with something even I didn't know. That's awful. Thank you, Dom, which gets us right into our Avalanche breakdown. Now, we're now right in the full swing of preseason hockey, which is so exciting. And I think people who say preseason is pointless are dumb. Preseason is not pointless. Preseason is important, and this offseason felt eternal.
I mean, the offseason always does. No matter how long it is too long. The playoffs are too exciting. They go on for a couple weeks, if not a couple months, and it is the most exciting time of the year. So to have then followed that up with a couple months of absolutely no news, I am so excited that we have preseason back and that the regular season is just around the corner.
Seriously. But I think the one problem right now is the Avalanche have only had the opportunity to play one preseason game in which they lost it in the very last second, apparently to the Dallas Stars. I was able to catch a little bit of it, but I was unfortunately at a wedding, which is a great start for my analysis of games. But with that in mind, I still wanted to talk about because most outlets only do the notable ones, but I wanted to talk about all of the Avalanche's additions and subtractions over the off seasons. Now, I think I'll save some notable stats and players on the Avalanche that you should look out for, as well as some events next week once we've had the opportunity to play a few more games. Hopefully, a couple more things to talk about. So let's roll into who we got here. And by all means, Tom, if you have anything to mention on some of these players, please do. So I'll hit on the big ones. I'll hit on the big ones first because most of the Avalanche's losses this summer did come in the form of two ways or AHL contracts with players that were depth signings or Eagles players that just moved on to a different team because they likely weren't getting the opportunities that they wanted with the Avalanche, which I think for the Avs is hard. Because I mean, look at that top six. When they're not injured, it's full.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a lot of talent at the top of that roster, but if you're losing players along the way on those two ways, you can't keep them all if they don't have a chance to play. But at the same time, if that prospect pool depletes too much, eventually you run up into that issue of salary cap and being able to keep paying your top six while still fronting a suitable four lines. So I think that's always the balance of an NHL team.
And I mean, the 2022 Avs truly emphasized that the best. You had people like Nathan McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen taking those hometown discounts. Cale Makar still is one of the best deals in the league. So it definitely, as you said, allows you to do that. But I mean, you look at some teams now that are running into that problem where their top end talent demands money. And of course, I think to a degree, some of them deserve it. But it runs you into an issue of your team wants to win, but you can't fill in around these top end guys. So yes, you're getting the production from them, but then when it comes down to crunch time, how are you finishing?
Well, and I think it's important that we do highlight that, Corey, because no matter how good your top six or those top two lines, for those of you who don't know hockey as well, their top six forward players are your top two lines of three. But you do need to have four lines. The Florida Panthers showed that. They were maybe not the highest top end talent on any one line or their top two lines, but they were able to roll four lines that were physical, talented, anybody could score. And that's really important in the modern NHL, is to not only have that high end talent but depth. And without depth, your success is hard to come by.
And I do feel like in this off season, the depth has improved. Some people like to disagree, but I definitely think, first of all, our defensive depth has improved a lot. We have a lot of good options now for the bottom two. Because, I mean, our top four is still a solid top four. You have Makar and Taves as the top line, and then Manson and Girard as your second pair. So the third pair is kind of up in the air right now with the retirement or, departure of people like Jack Johnson. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for some of the few really good prospects that we have to step into those roles. And ultimately, the Avalanche are often criticized for their shallow prospect pool, which I don't disagree with, especially when you look at teams like Dallas that have an absolutely monster prospect pool with people like Stankoven and Wyatt Johnson. But looking at some of the options that the Avs have coming up, I'm frankly excited.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to highlight as well. I know you were mentioning some of the biggest additions and subtractions. I was wondering, Corey, I wanted to get your thoughts on the contract extension for Logan O'Connor, because 6 years is a long extension to commit to a guy. I feel like he was a bit of a hometown guy or someone that was with the Avs for long enough to warrant that 6 year extension, but he is coming off an injury. So how do you feel about extensions like that and what it means for the rest of your prospect pool?
Oh, I'm so hyped. I am so hyped. Logan O'Connor has always been one of my favorite depth guys, especially on that new Roaring 20s line. But I mean, I don't know. He was always a guy that I think fans naturally gravitated towards. But in a way, I don't think keeping him around for no reason. He's not just there as a pretty face for the fans. He's a guy who can still make an impact with a hard physical play. And I mean, injuries always come to those bottom six guys because it's just a rougher style of play. He's definitely a grinding player, but he's eclipsed the 25 point mark a couple times. And frankly, I feel like he'll continue to add that same value that he's brought every year that he's been here. And I don't think that the contract extension, I did a little bit of research. I believe it was 2.5 a year, so 2.5 by 6. I don't think that's an overpayment, especially with the cap set to rise, but I think it also sets that into place where you have guys like Mikko Rantanen and his extension coming up, which I wholeheartedly believe is going to get done just fine. But obviously the problem is you now have Leon Draisaitl signing for $14 million. Do I think Mikko Rantanen deserves $14 million? No, but he did score over 100 points for 2 seasons in a row, and I don't see any reason why he could do that going forward. But having Logan O'Connor locked up, I think it just offers clarity moving forward, especially with as cap strapped as the Avalanche are.
Yeah, it is that stability that you're looking for in that depth, like we were talking about, and thinking about with. I think the key for when you talked about the prospect pool a bit before, the key about any prospect is getting them ice time, and like we were saying, that can be sometimes hard when you have a top six that's as high quality as the Avalanche. Do you think Landeskog is going to be able to return this year? And if so, do you think he slides down the depth chart, allowing some of those younger talents to fill in on the second line, for example, or even move up to the third line?
I mean, first and foremost, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm really sick of people saying, "Oh, Landeskog's not coming back. He's not coming back." I truly don't feel like him, Joe Sakic, Chris McFarland would jerk us around if he wasn't going to come back and if he was just going to straight up retire. To me, I've seen enough evidence from the videos, from his own statements, that I wholeheartedly believe that he's going to come back. I respect that they don't want to put a timeline on it because he's right. To quote him directly, if you put a timeline on it, you just end up disappointed, which is what we did before, and it hurt all of our feelings previously. But he's somebody that I know is going to come back, as well as, you got a lot of people who are acting like fucking doctors in the comments sections on any posts, any articles, any videos. Like, what the fuck do you know? first of all, Gabriel Landeskog is rich, so he can afford the care and procedures necessary to help put him in an advantageous position to come back more than just your average Joe Schmo. And I think Lonzo Ball is a great comparison, even though he's a basketball player. He had the same procedure, but basketball is a lot heavier on the knees because you're jumping up and down all the time and you have that kind of impact. And he's now moved back into full contact scrimmages and practices. I mean, is he back fully? No, at least not last that I checked. But if he's able to come back as well, I don't see any reason why Landeskog wouldn't be able to come back either. In terms of him sliding down, I think it's just about what player are we going to get when he comes back. Because the noted statistic that I always like to reference is 80% of players who have the procedure are able to come back and perform at the same level that they did before they had it. Now, when you haven't played in 2 years, I do think that will perhaps hamper his ability to perform at that maximum level, just starting off. But I also don't see any reason that as he plays and gets back into form that he couldn't slide back up. But I would imagine that if he comes back in, that he would be more of a third line player, just to make sure that you're not, just to play it safely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I agree that I think the bigger question is not if he comes back, but what player is he when he comes back after so much time off and after going through such a unique surgery situation and being out, like you said, for so long. Obviously, as a Sharks fan, I feel a similar stress or a similar pain in regards to Couture and his injury and how limited he's been over the last couple of seasons. I remember him when he was playing a bit more in his prime, and he still is a great leader as our captain for our team. But I worry about what he's going to be looking like on the ice when he does come back, because unlike Landeskog, we have a little bit less information and confirmation on his ice time, and as far as I know, he has not taken any thing that has any remote contact. So I'm hopeful for you and for all Avs fans and just for the sport of hockey that a talent like Landeskog is coming back into the league and can find a form of his old self and maybe even work up onto that second line. But I do think if he plays on the third line, that opening a slot or having those slots open so you have that young talent can step in, I think is the natural order of things.
Yeah. And I mean, you know what? No, I'll save this thought for later when we're talking about playoffs, but it just has to do with him and everybody coming back. But yeah, frankly, they've missed his leadership terribly. I've just missed him as a player. He is, wholeheartedly my favorite player. He was the first jersey that I ever got, and not getting the chance to see the guy that, means the most to you, it sucks. I mean, of course, I'm always blessed. Not just me. We are always blessed to see Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar, Mikko Rantanen, and Devon Toews step out onto the ice all the time, but I truly do feel like there was missed opportunity and victories not having him there.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that, and I agree. I think injuries that is always the risk, and it is a part of hockey, unfortunately, and part of most sports, and they are going to happen, and it can have a big impact on a team as a whole, on their potential. And with that in mind, I know we talked about Landeskog and we talked about OC a little bit. But with Nichushkin and Lehkonen, also key players with injuries, how do you think that's going to impact the Avs early in the season and their projections for the year?
It's so funny that you say that. I was at a gathering not too long ago, and one of my program directors, very great mentor, very well-connected person, she's lovely, but she looked at me drunkenly and said, "We're going to suck at the beginning of the season." And I told her, "We're not going to suck. It'll be rough, yes. But as long as you have Nathan MacKinnon and Cale Makar on the ice, I truly feel like you're going to be okay." And I do want to touch more on Arturi and Val Nichushkin in a little bit, but there's no denying the holes that those two leave. I mean, you're missing 3 of your top 6 forwards, which is not an easy thing to navigate, but the Avalanche have always been one of, if not the highest scoring team in the league, with a incredibly speedy, in-your-face type of offense. So I truly don't feel like it's going to be so detrimental that we can't score, can't win. Do I think it's going to be as easy? No. But I don't think it'll be something that will be an issue for very long.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the hope, right? We don't want the injuries to hamper the team for too long. And I know, I guess so. My question to you would be, if they are injured and it is going to be rough early in this season, what do the Avalanche need to do to start the season strong? What should the focus be, the emphasis? What should fans be rooting for?
Well, I think I'll answer it with this that I've been kind of holding off on, and that's talking about everybody that we've lost and now the people that we've gained. And I think that can help me hopefully lead into an answer in that question. So, first and foremost, I'll run through everybody we've lost. I'll start with the big boys. First of all, Pavel Francouz, absolute Avalanche legend. I don't think there's any Avalanche fan who does not still chant Frankie in their dreams. He officially retired just because he dealt with injuries all his career, but absolute stud in the cup run. But he's still with the team as a goalie coach, which is fantastic. Glad he's still around. Andrew Cogliano, who I believe played with your Sharks as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, prior to signing with the Avs, I believe we traded him over to you guys 2 or 3 seasons ago now. 3, I think now.
Yeah. So he also officially retired with, should have had the Iron Man streak, but, different can of worms for a different day. But he's also still with the team in a front office role. He actually lives here in Colorado, which is kind of awesome. So that's cool. He's still around. Zach Parise, who absolutely shatters my heart. I wished we could have won that cup for him. Absolute storied career. 1,254 games, 434 goals, 455 assists, 889 points with a plus 76 on the career. It's kind of amazing. And I think Joe Pavelski is another good example of just these absolute stud muffins who play this long and just can never win that cup.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Parise, like you said, he is an icon and definitely one of those players who is recognized by all fans, and you hope will be recognized enough to make it to the Hall of Fame and not have that lack of a cup hold him back. It's just like Joe Pavelski, and I definitely would love to talk more about my good man Joe at some point later. But back to you with your list.
Brandon Duhaime left for the Washington Capitals on a 2-year, $3.7 million contract. He had 5 points in 18 games with the Avs and only 1 point in the 11th playoff games. He's never eclipsed the 20-point mark while playing for an NHL team. He's actually been in the league for a smaller amount of time than I realized. But he's really your fourth line grinder guy. He's 200 pounds. He's out there to throw his weight around, cause chaos. But so I think 3.7 million for 2 years is a bit much for somebody like that, who's never really going to elevate above that line role. But again, we're paying guys more, and just like you said, they're the ones putting their bodies on the line the most. But his relationship with Marc-Andre Fleury was also fun. It was their prank wars, very fun.
At a certain point, too, you're betting on potential there, and there is no guarantees in this league and in any league, any sport. So I think ultimately teams do have to take a chance sometimes and overpay, and not every move is going to work out. So I think it'll still remain to be seen whether that ends up being a net positive or a true loss for the Avalanche this year.
Yeah, and I mean, with some of the people that we're bringing in, I don't feel like it's ultimately going to be. I think that's a kind of guy who didn't have any particular specialty and skill set. And that's not to shit on Brandon Duhaime. He was a great guy, but I mean, he's a replaceable player with other players who play similarly to how he does, and I think having that spot open gives the chance for some of those prospects to come up. Speaking of departures, Jack Johnson, the famous number 3, who won the cup with the Avs, went to the Blackhawks, then came back to the Avalanche. He went to the Columbus Blue Jackets on a 1-year deal. Speaking of the Columbus Blue Jackets, our hearts go out to the Gaudreau family. That, man, when I read that headline, I frankly didn't even believe that it was real. That was insane.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, the Gaudreau family and Johnny Gaudreau was a true icon for the city of Columbus, and I think really a player who, for all the recognition received, I think could still have earned or deserved more So I really do think it's a loss for the league as a whole. But I'm excited to see how the city and the team respond, as we might talk more about later.
Yes, absolutely. But to keep it rolling, Sean Walker, he went off 5 years, 3.6 million a year with the Carolina Hurricanes. He is that coveted right-handed defenseman. Now, Dom, I don't know if you can necessarily say why is a right-handed defenseman a little bit more sought after than.
Well, I think what it comes down to is angles. With anything, when you have a lot of people on the ice, you're trying to find where can you get shots from. And when you're looking at defensemen, you want someone who, if you have a right-handed defenseman, do you want him on the left side of the ice so he can have a stick in the middle and have another shot path that you can work to? If you're going D to D at the blue line, having you want on that left side, you want to have a right-handed defenseman, and on the right side of the left-handed defenseman. I think perhaps in the league right now, we just have a bit more of those left-handed defensemen, and that's what made the value increase. But generally, you want to have a balance of both and have them paired together so that they both have the ability to put their sticks in the middle on defense, but also get some good shots off and set up opportunities for tips, redeflection or deflections, redirections, things like that on the offensive side of the ice.
Exactly. And as Dom said, the right-handed defenseman is just a rare breed in the NHL, which is pretty remarkable. So they're pretty sought after because they can play on that right-hand side. Because if you think about it, if you take a left-handed defenseman and you put him on the right side, well, then his stick is not towards the middle, as Dom said. So you can't receive passes the same way that you would if right-handed defenseman on the right-hand side. So it does bum me out that we couldn't keep him, especially with the fact that we gave up a first-round pick to get him. But frankly, the first-round pick was more to get rid of Ryan Johansson. Bless Ryjo, the man was much too slow for the Colorado Avalanche system. But lest we forget, he still scored goals, but I just don't think he was made for the speed in the lineup that the Avalanche are composed of.
Oh, you guys are the perfect, the epitome of speed kills, and it's really the same philosophy for those of you who are football fans as well, and just getting into hockey now. If you know what the Miami Dolphins are doing and how they are just stockpiling fast receivers and running backs, and they're just trying to win on speed alone, the Avs have the potential to be that team or to represent that team in the league with some of the fastest players, including Cale Makar and Nathan MacKinnon. They really do pop off the screen. You think about how fast these guys are moving, and yet these guys make everyone around them look like they're skating slow. It's really impressive, the system the Avs have built over the last few years.
Oh yeah, it's always magical to watch. But Yakov Trenin, this is one that I actually am kind of bummed that we couldn't keep him around. 4-year deal, $14 million with the Minnesota Wild. Similar to Duhaime, he's never eclipsed 25 points in the NHL. But what I loved about him is he was a fantastic face-off guy. Fantastic. And I mean, he would get into those dirty areas and he would win the puck battles every time. So genuinely, that was a guy that I was like, oh, I hope we can keep that guy around. Because there was 3 people that I really wanted the Avalanche to re-sign in the offseason. He was one of them. But, just fortunately did not work out.
Well, I think the way to look at this one too is Minnesota has a lot of needs, and I'm sure we might get into that if we ever discuss power rankings or how we see the NHL before the season has started with our all way too early predictions. But I think it is that opportunity as well for your prospect pool to see who will be that next man up, who could possibly provide that and more, and have the keys to another cup run. It's a sad loss in the moment, and you do see in the playoffs having those guys who you can just throw out there for a defensive zone faceoff, get a guaranteed win, and then he goes back off the ice, that short 15-second shift, but it's all important for possession. But I think it while it is a loss, it is replaceable, and you do have enough talent on the Avs roster to compensate for him not being able to be re-signed.
Man, I don't know though. That's definitely one hole that I've always noticed with the Avalanche is our face-off is just never as good as it probably should be. And we've had a couple really good guys over the years. JT Compher was a good one before he left, but it feels like every time we have a good face-off, man, they're gone the next year. So,
well, and maybe that has to look to the coaching, and that's where the change would have to be to put a bit of a higher emphasis, or maybe that's all the way up to the GM's office. But I will say the one thing that the Avs do have that helps them compensate for that, or what I think I was trying to allude to, is when you have such a fast-paced, high speed just across the whole roster, it makes it a lot easier to close out to those pucks and to fight and regain that possession, even if you don't win the faceoff. For those of you who aren't big watchers of hockey, sure, you win some faceoffs clean back, but a lot of times they don't go too far even in the wins, so that puck is still accessible to the team that lost, and I do say lost in quotes, the face-off. So with speed like the Avalanche have, I do think it helps to level the playing field. If you had that consistency of face-off victories, I think the Avs would be the hands down favorite to represent the West in the Stanley Cup. But I think that would, I don't know if you can add that talent without risking losing some of the other parts that make the Avs unique and have that speed kills factor.
No, you're exactly right. And at the end of the day, I'll always take that speed over anything else. It's a title that I've been proud that we've held for several seasons now. Just the Avalanche are the fastest team in the league. You know, they'll always get by you with their speed. We'll do a rapid fire here on. I have our two-way guys and our AHL guys that we lost. So we have Arvid Holm, goalie prospect. He signed with Rogel BK Sweden. And I think, to touch briefly, I think being a goalie is one of the hardest positions in hockey. One, because you're out there for all 60 minutes. And two, because there's really only ever two goalies on a team. And that's if you're running a 1A, 1B situation. So if you're a goalie prospect and your team already has kind of their number one and number two guys, it can be really hard to get the opportunity to actually play in the show. So it's tough. It is tough. First of all, to be a goalie that's good and consistent. And I think that's the biggest thing with this is it's can you maintain consistency? And there are very few goaltenders in the NHL that I think can say that year after year they maintain that consistency. So for goalie prospects, it's always good to maybe explore other options. So I do not blame Mr. Arvid Holm for signing elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note with goalies that while they might not be in the thick of it, sprinting up and down the ice and being in on hits, they do suffer somewhat some of the most. When we talked about knee injuries, I've seen firsthand just with again with my father having played goalie, the long-term effects or how that wears down on your knees. It is very hard to be consistent and to stay in good shape. Although I have to say, I wish that the Sharks could have that 1A, 1B, and that strong goalie performances. It's been a rough few years for us. So I'm looking forward to the days when we might have that potentially that situation where we can have a bit more stability out in our franchise.
And we'll touch on it more, but you got Askarov. We'll touch on him in a little bit, but. Quickly, as I have failed to do, Alex Bucage signed with the Laval Rocket, the Montreal Canadiens AHL affiliate, and I'll touch on this when we talk about our playoff picks, but Montreal just continues to stack on that youth talent. Mr. Bucage, he had a great year with the Eagles and the Grizzlies, but he was battling a shoulder injury. Then we have Ivan Prosvetov, which some Avs fans may remember. I felt like every time he came out, he played well, and I think he really did get shafted in that he was playing a vastly superior Florida Panthers team. He let in a lot of goals, and then you just never saw him again. But I truly feel like he was somebody who could have done more. I'm sad that he didn't get the opportunity to do that, but he signed 3 years with CSKA Moscow in the KHL. Riley Tufte, big 6'6" dude, left winger. Wish we could have held on to him because every time he appeared, he was great. Was one of the Eagles' best players. Feel like there maybe would have been more of a role for him, but c'est la vie. He's with the Boston Bruins, who continue to stack up with big guys, with additions like Nikita Zadorov. Nate Klurman, he signed 1 year, 2-way with the Penguins. Corey Schooneman signed with the Springfield Thunderbirds, the AHL affiliate of the St. Louis Blues. Frederick Olofsson, who I think some fans may remember, fourth-line guy who was up with the Avs a good majority of the first half of the season. Vanished a bit more towards the end of the season. He is now with the Swiss National League with EV Zug. Gianni Fairbrother, he's in the ECHL with the Utah Grizzlies, also somebody who's been battling injuries throughout their career. Brad Hunt, former captain of the Colorado Eagles, now with the defending AHL champion Hershey Bears, the affiliate to the Washington Capitals. He was actually the team's all-star. He led the team in scoring with 49 points in 70 games. This is the guy I'll miss. He didn't play, I think, this year. He maybe played 1 or 2 games, but he was always a really fun guy, missing an incredible amount of teeth and an incredible amount of hair. And I don't know if it was myself or my mom who said it, or if the good old Mark Mosier said it during a broadcast, but one time we hit Brad Hunt, boom, and he scored a goal right after, and it was fantastic. Absolutely wicked slap shot from the blue line. Good guy, good guy. Sad to see him go, honestly. Spencer Smallman also signed a 2-way with the Caps. Vladislav Kamenev, he went back to the KHL with CSKA Moskva. He is now their assistant captain. And finally, Caleb Jones, who signed a 2-way contract with the Kings. Caleb Jones, brother of Seth Jones, in case you didn't. I thought he always did well whenever he had to come up and play. Him and Sam Malinsky had a pretty good chemistry on the third pairing whenever we had injuries to defense, but just seems like a cap casualty at this point, someone that we couldn't afford to keep around, and I guess we just wanted to bring in some fresh faces. So those are all of the Avalanche subtractions from this offseason.
Yeah, Corey, thanks for running through those for everyone. Are we feeling it's time, or do you have more on the Avalanche breakdown, or are we going to start looking at other teams in the league as well?
I have one more thing for the Avalanche breakdown. I want to touch on the people that we have brought in to replace those subtractions, and instead of the boring stuff, I have a fun fact about each of these players, and I think we'll touch more on these players as preseason, regular season gets underway, especially as the roster kind of takes shape, because I don't anticipate all of these guys sticking around, unfortunately, at least with the Avalanche most likely going to go down to the Eagles or be put through the waiver wire. But I figured I'd make it a little bit more fun. So we have Calvin DeHaan, a left-handed defenseman, was with the Lightning. He was a 12th overall pick by the New York Islanders in 2009. This guy is the definition of an NHL journeyman. And we have Cal Rosen, who was actually with the Avalanche and Eagles before in the 2019-20 season before he went off to Toronto, so he's back now. Jacob McDonald. Now, this one is an interesting one. Jacob McDonald, he was with the Avalanche during their Stanley Cup winning campaign. However, his name is not engraved on the Stanley Cup.
Oh, did he not play enough games in that season to qualify?
He did not play enough. He did not play enough games, and he didn't play in the he didn't play in the playoffs, I believe. But he only played 8 games with the Colorado Avalanche that season. I did do a little bit of research. He did receive a ring, I believe. He still got a ring, but I did double check the Stanley Cup. I looked at the Avalanche engravings. His name is indeed not on the cup.
And while a ring might be a consolation prize, for those of you who don't know, having your name engraved on Lord Stanley's cup is the highest honor. I know my dad would kill just to touch the thing, let alone have his name engraved. So for all hockey players, that is the real dream, and a ring just doesn't cut it.
Yeah, it's genuinely a real bummer. I mean, he got to be part of the celebration, which is great for him, but yeah. Damn. I think the only one who petitioned and got onto it was Ryan Murray, although I'm not entirely sure what that process involves for him to get his name on the cup, because it is on there, but I'm fairly certain he was injured a majority of the season, so I don't know what caused that to be the case. But anyway, yeah, Jacob McDonald back with the Avs, name not on the cup. Parker Kelly, I think you'll like this one, Dom. Parker Kelly was one of the players who last season knocked out Dylan Larkin.
Very nice. Fighting, for those of you who don't know, one of my favorite parts.
Oh, no.
Hockey.
I don't know if you saw this game. It was not a fight. It was not. It was nasty. He came in with one of the Joseph brothers, and it's a really weird play. Look it up after this. Parker Kelly skates into Dylan Larkin, and it looks like his fist, not like he punches him, but his fist just goes into Dylan Larkin's face, and Dylan Larkin's just out cold, and that caused one of his concussions, unfortunately. It was a really weird video, but yeah, that's Parker Kelly.
Well, we don't love to see concussions. That's one of the downsides of any contact sport, but we do love to see a good hit, and even those awkward ones that are just quite unique can be quite a thing to look at. So I'll definitely have to go to the tape and see where I can track that one down.
TJ Tynan, he has never played a full season in the NHL, but he has represented the U.S. at the World Championships on multiple occasions. Eric Brandstrom, now I know you'll remember this, he was one of the players who received a 10-minute misconduct when the Senators and the Panthers combined for 167 penalty minutes.
Wow, yeah, wow, yes. For those of you who don't know, go straight onto YouTube, look it up. It'll be easy to find, and you can see all of the mayhem that led to 167 penalty minutes. I can't say for certain if that is a record, but it's got to be up there in the most we've ever seen in a game, at least in the era of logging it. And that is, yeah, it was quite an impressive feat to witness. One I hope we don't see again necessarily, because it's more fun when the guys are on the ice, not when they're all sent off it.
Well, it made me curious, so I looked it up. 167 minutes is in fact very much not the record. The record is, let me read. The record is 419 minutes.
How?
And
Wouldn't that require the whole team to get a game misconduct plus, like, that'd be 220 minutes plus other penalties?
So according to this breakdown, it was in a 2004 game between the Flyers and the Senators. No surprise there. It says the Flyers had 213 minutes and the Senators had 206 minutes. And the summary given here is the game was marked by multiple brawls, blood, players being tossed, and a goalie versus goalie throwdown.
Well, we will have to give our recap of that perhaps on the next episode, because that sounds like quite the video that we should definitely review for just both of ourselves. But also, it sounds like Ottawa seems to be a common thread here. Maybe their organization is an issue. We need to get someone from their fan base on here to tell us if this is a constant repeating pattern, or if maybe they should try to break the cycle.
No wonder they can't fucking make it into the playoffs. They just keep fighting everybody. But anyway, Callum Ritchie, our top prospect currently, he won gold at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup, where he also received the award for most points at 10. Personally, somebody that I'm very excited for. I hope that he's able to earn a spot. He apparently, what I read, he has a 9-game kind of a prove-it audition, and I don't know if that includes preseason games or if that's 9 regular season games, but he is a center winger, so I think that they might decide to throw him on a 4th-line wing to see how he does, and I'm really eager to see, because he did well during the prospect showcase. Definitely someone I recommend everybody keep their eye on. Kevin Mandolese, goaltender, he was part of Ottawa's carousel of goalies this last season. Gosh. And apparently Ottawa is just the team we like to steal players from. Oliver Killington was out from the NHL for over a year and a half, battling his mental health. If he plays for the Avalanche, it'll be his first full season in a long time. His best year was with the 21-22 Flames, where he put up 31 points in 73 games. Definitely a more dynamic defenseman. Matthew Phillips, he is lighter than Connor Bedard, 161 pounds versus 185 pounds, according to Elite Prospects, despite being 7 years older.
That is concerning. While there are pads in hockey, you do need to have a little bit of weight on you, or you're just going to get crushed out there. These are some big men on the ice, and I think everything looks, just with any sport, everybody looks shorter and smaller on TV, depending on the angles that you're filming from. How basketball players all look like they're 6 foot, but they're really 6'6". You see the same thing with hockey players, but a small guy like that, who's 20 pounds lighter than somebody who's already a small guy, that's a little bit concerning. I'm not sure if he'll be able to make it through a season without having a serious injury.
He's never been a big NHL guy, always AHL. And finally, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. He has played with 3 Stanley Cup winning teams, but has never managed to win it himself. And in fact, he played against the Avalanche on the Lightning in the finals the year the Avalanche claimed their 3rd cup. This is a guy that I love. Technically, he's only signed to a PTO, but I can't imagine that he wouldn't make the team. Very familiar face. Apparently, already demonstrating good leadership qualities out there. I mean, they slapped the A on him for the preseason games. I love this dude. He's a great personality. I was super excited to see that he was coming back. So I would imagine he'll be the fourth line center here going. But Dom, you have been chomping at the bit, and in fact, you went above and beyond, as a matter of fact, for this. So we decided to create our playoff picks, but you did something even more than that, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I took a first stab, and like I said, a way too early attempt. I am going to be 100% wrong on at least half of this because that is the world of professional
But
sports in the
that's
NHL.
what makes it fun. In sports, the result and the product is never guaranteed, so it's fun to guess.
Yeah, so I guess how would you like me to approach this? Do you want me to go from the bottom and put them in like tiers from bottom to top, or do you want me to start with who I think are the teams, the top 8 that could make the playoffs from each conference?
Let's just do playoffs, and then you can do your full rankings here, because I am curious to hear you maybe put him into tiers like you just suggested. But let's start with let's do this. You give me your 16 playoff picks and why. I'll give you my 16 playoff picks and why, and then you can roll on those power rankings that you put together.
Absolutely. So I will start with the Eastern Conference, and naturally, we cannot start power rankings and playoff teams without the defending Stanley Cup champions. No matter what happens, the Florida Panthers absolutely amazed during this past playoffs, and they should be expected, especially if Bobrovsky is consistent, which we talked about with goalies earlier. They should be expected to not only make the playoffs, but possibly lead the league in points this year. Next from the East, I believe the New York Rangers, who the Florida Panthers beat on their way to that Stanley Cup championship. They have a very stacked and loaded roster of talent, a very passionate fan base, and a great place to play in the Garden that's unlike any other in New York. They should be considered a lock for the playoffs, barring a series of injuries. Additionally, from the East, I believe the Boston Bruins, Carolina Hurricanes, Toronto Maple Leafs, and Tampa Bay Lightning are all candidates to return to the playoffs. They have each made it for at least the last 6 years. For the Hurricanes, 7 consecutive years for the Lightning, and both the Bruins and Toronto Maple Leafs are attempting to make it to a 9th consecutive NHL playoffs. However, I wonder, I'm a little concerned to see if maybe one of those teams drops out as the rest of the league catches up. And finally, the remaining 2 teams from the East that I think will be able to slip in our
those
playoff
dreaded wild card spots.
The wild card spots.
Oh,
but
goodness me.
The thing you need to have for a wild card spot are true wild card teams, and I think no one embodies this more than the New Jersey Devils. In fact, I think they could exceed that expectation and secure a spot without it having to be a wild card. But I think they have perhaps been a little underrated. They've been working through some issues with their goaltending and restocking their roster, but I think they have a lot of talent and could play in a division that, or in a conference that's always very competitive and physical. And finally, the good old Detroit Red Wings. As a Sharks fan, they are not my favorite team ever in the world, but they're also not my least favorite. I do have to say, though, I think it is their time to make a bid to return to the playoffs this year and represent the East as a wild card.
All right, who do you got for the West, Dom?
On the West side, we do also, going to the Stanley Cup Finals, we do have to give credit to the Edmonton Oilers, especially with signing Leon Draisaitl to that massive contract. I do think that they, barring, again, a series of injuries, should be expected to make the playoffs and put up a ton of points during the season. Their power play was unlike anything we had seen before last year, and I expect that to continue. Also, I do have a series. They're actually ranked back-to-back in my overall power rankings, but I believe each of the Stars, Avalanche, Predators, and Vancouver Canucks, I expect them all to have strong seasons this year and be able to make a run to the playoffs and not require a wild card. I think we saw all of their potential last year. The Stars have been a staple for the last few, as have the Avalanche. Nashville has just been rebuilding and looks in a really good place to make a run. And Vancouver, had they not had that injury and some shaky goaltending near the end, could they have been a legitimate contender to make the Cup final last year? I think it's a possibility. Next, we would have the Winnipeg Jets, another team that I feel like has been consistently good recently and has the depth, the strength on the roster to be considered a playoff team, or at least a contender for the wild card. But as we look at the wild cards, what I see specifically, I'm looking out at the Pacific Division. The Vegas Golden Knights, they have been really good in recent years, making it to Cup finals. But we have seen them start to regress some small bits here and there. They haven't been able to re-sign everybody. Those rosters that were super successful when they first came into the league are starting to age out. And the final wildcard slot, I think the team that is rebuilding, much to my chagrin, as I would love the Sharks to be the best team in California. I believe the LA Kings are going to make a good bid to be that last team to make it in from the West, and could potentially surprise a team like the Edmonton Oilers, because they always play them well in the playoffs. And we've seen the Oilers play the Kings for, 3 or 4 straight playoffs now?
Yeah.
I think eventually the Kings are going to get their series. They're going to get the right combo of guys on the ice. Is it this year? I'm not sure, but I think they could be that team that is the wild card that could be a potential Cinderella, sneaky good upset in that first round.
I will not even lie to you before I even tell you. I've stopped believing in the Kings. I picked them the first 2 years that they played Edmonton, and they did well those first 2 years, but this most recent year, Edmonton, I think, has their number at this point, and they just did not look super great, especially against Edmonton.
And that is the beauty of the wild card, though, as the LA Kings. While they wouldn't have control over their opponent, when you have Edmonton, Dallas, Colorado, and Nashville, because I do expect Nashville to be that good this year, I think it's an arms race at the top, and any of those 4 teams could win. That, I mean, theoretically would give you a 75% chance that the Kings don't have to play the Oilers in the first round, if my math is correct.
We can only hope.
But, all good things must come to an end, and I think that's true of bad things as well. So there will come a time when the Kings do beat the Oilers again. I guess the only question is whether or not McDavid is still an Oiler at that time, or if he is retired.
Seriously, the only way the Kings will beat the Oilers if McDavid is retired, or he plays on that team. Pulls a Gretzky, goes and plays for the. But I'll let you know right now. I think we're going to go over an hour, but for the sake of this being our first episode, I've been really enjoying our conversation, so I'd like to keep rolling for now, especially because we have a lot more exciting stuff to talk about, and I'd like you to be able to talk about the Sharks a little bit, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, let's roll with it. Let's see if I hope the fans, our listeners, whoever they may be, whenever you do have a chance to hear this, I hope you're willing to stick it out with us for this extra half an hour, and or maybe like half an hour, maybe a bit less. We'll see how it goes. We'll just play it by ear, because Corey, I would love to hear who your 8 playoff teams are from each division, and see where we have some overlap and where we've got something different.
We definitely have some disagreements in some places. But anyway, we are definitely flying by the seat of our pants, everyone. We're figuring this out as we go. We're having a good time doing it. But all right, I did it a little differently than you did. I didn't just do straight 8 Eastern, Western. I did the Eastern Conference, Western Conference, but I also split it up by division, a bit more traditional playoff format. However, I have these teams in no particular order, kind of, except for the wild card spots. But, here's how I got it. So, for the Eastern Conference in the Atlantic Division, I think, obviously, you have the Florida Panthers going back. Although, I don't know if they'll be that same dominant team that they were that won the Stanley Cup, just because you do have a couple notable subtractions. However, you were able to keep important guys around, like Sam Reinhart. I mean, you always have Alexander Barkov, who I'm pretty sure is going to win the Selke Trophy every year now that Patrice Bergeron is gone. For those who don't know, the Selke Trophy is for the best defensive forward out there, and Alexander Barkov is the epitome of that. The Boston Bruins, whom I highly dislike, but every year, no matter what, seem to always just be naturally really good. but always seem to go out fairly early. But I think the biggest problem with the Bruins this year is, can they re-sign Swayman? If they don't re-sign Swayman, I anticipate them maybe having some issues, just because this is a team that's always had a really good goaltender. I mean, when they won it in 2011, they had Tim Thomas. Then after that, they had Tuukka Rask. Then after that, they had Linus Ullmark. Then after that, they have Swayman. I mean, hell, I don't follow the Bruins obviously as closely, but it's been well over a decade since they had goaltending problems. But now they've perhaps created it on their own. And regardless of what you think Swayman deserves, I think he's fantastic. It'd be cool if he was an Avalanche player, because I love that dude. He's one of the few Boston Bruins players that I like. But we'll see. But I don't anticipate them not making a playoff spot. And then my third team for the Atlantic Division is, of course, the Maple Leafs. I just feel like no matter what, they're a perennial playoff contender, regardless of how far they end up making it in the playoffs or their perennial chokes. But they did, I think, get better this year defensively. It'll be interesting to see how their goaltending stacks up. As for the Metropolitan Division, the New York Rangers, when you have a team with such good offense as well as a number one goaltender in net in Igor Shesterkin, I think you're always going to be able to compete for a playoff spot and perhaps, conference finals like they did year in and year out. The Rangers are one of my favorite East teams. I think they're always right up there. The New Jersey Devils, actually, I think will be in a legitimate playoff spot. And I think that's due to the fact that their young talent last year just didn't have anything to go off of. Not a great coaching system, which I think actually will be improved with Sheldon Keefe. I think he can resonate well with the young players and utilize people like Jack Hughes' talents and Nico Hischier really well. And now they have that legitimate number one goaltender in Jacob Markstrom. So frankly, I don't see why they shouldn't make just a solid run into, a second or third spot in that Metropolitan Division. And then finally, the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, the Carolina Hurricanes, I think, are in an interesting position because they are one of those East teams that I just think got worse this offseason. They lost a lot of what made their defense really great. And who knows if what they've replaced it with will be able to operate in the same way, as well as is Freddie Anderson going to be able to keep the injury bug away? Antti Ranta just retired, so I don't know if the Carolina Hurricanes will be that dominant defensive force that we've seen, and they might even slip below a wild cards or to a wild card spot. But I can't imagine that they don't make the playoffs, but I do think they'll be in a bit of a stickier situation this year. Now, for the wild card, which for the East is absolutely monstrously difficult to pick, because I was looking at last year's playoffs, and frankly, man, I even wrote in my wild card 2 that it could be anyone. For my wild card 1, I picked the Flyers. I think they were right on the precipice last year. They played a good system under John Tortorella, who I have mixed feelings about on any given day. But they also have, Michkov and Fedotov in the net. So I mean, they have, I think, the things there in order to compete for that wild card spot. But I think comparatively to the rest of the teams in the East, that's the most that they can hope for. For the second wild card spot, Dom, I'm with you. I feel like the Detroit Red Wings, it's their wild card spot to lose. And with that being said, that leaves out the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I do think losing their captain may mess them up a little bit. Not having Mikhail Sergachev is going to mess them up a little bit. Granted, when you have Kucherov, Edmund, and Vasilevsky on your team, I think there is always a great chance that you're still going to make the playoffs. Because anybody who says Vasi is washed, you're just dead wrong. Is he the best goaltender in the league anymore? No. But my God, playoff Vasi is a different beast.
Playoff Vasi is unmatched. And really quickly, I would like to say you are correct. I did have the Devils as above a wild card. I misreported that, and I agree with you. I think they could pass the Hurricanes. It does seem like overall there's a lot of overlap there in the East, where the only key difference being how you and I rate the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Philadelphia Flyers. I do think Detroit has that spot locked up in the wild card, like you said. and it is just a matter of who out of anyone in the East, because you can't forget the Penguins or the Capitals. Sidney Crosby and Ovi, they're still there. They're still real. The Islanders, are they going to be a thing? The East is so competitive, everyone. It is hard to say who will be the
Yeah.
wild card teams. It is just so physical too. It's always close within a couple points to decide who makes the playoffs and who's sitting on the couch come May.
I mean, yeah, you look at these point totals from last year for 4, 5, and 6 of the Metro. You have the Washington Capitals, who somehow made the playoffs with a minus 37 goal differential at 91, Pittsburgh at 88, and Philadelphia at 87. I mean, because if you recall, it was a single night where 4 of these teams played to determine who gets that final playoff spot. We have hardly ever seen that. That's insane.
Yeah, and you just focused on the Metro, but that's where the Red Wings come in with that 91 points as well with the Capitals and just losing on a tiebreaker.
Yeah.
Even though they had one more win on the season at 41, 32, and 9, the Capitals were able to pull it out on other similarity tiebreakers. I don't remember exactly how that was decided, but I believe it was common games or common opponents and records in those games.
I had like a picture of it being broken down. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's crazy. Some teams I'd like to touch on in the East, though, because I feel like the West is a little easier, strangely enough. But yeah, the East is so hard. I think a dark horse, because people are writing them off that they still have a few more years, which is probably true, and I'll probably be dead wrong saying this now. I think the Montreal Canadiens could secretly do really well.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd want my thoughts on that, currently at the start, I have them ranked overall out of the 32 teams in the league as number 23. That being said, with the Canadian teams, they've got this potential, and it's just whether or not they can live up to it. I think it's always tough to see and tough to find out. There's such a high expectation on those Canadian teams to do well. I always wonder if that hampers them a little bit. But I do think in a wide open East, that position that I have them in, they're just as much in it as anyone else, as the Islanders, the Sabres, the Penguins, the Caps. Like they could very well be ahead of the Lightning even. They could be ahead of any of those teams by the end of the season for sure.
I just think I think their GM's name is Kent Hughes. Yeah, what he's doing is fantastic. And they've just stacked up on those youthful prospects who have that incredibly high upside. Plus that Suzuki, Slavkovsky, and Caulfield line, that top line is really good. And I think has the potential to score in bunches this upcoming year. And I mean, you have Lane Hudson, which is their, as some people have described, Cale Makar-esque defender, and who could compete for the Calder. So I'll be interested to see how the Canadians fare this year. I have a bit more hope in them than other people do, but I think they are, regardless, a few years away from being a really good team again. And then there's Buffalo, who I've stopped believing in. I'm sorry. I love you. I want you to do it, but you've just let me down every damn year.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think if anything, Montreal should definitely not be counted out in the next 2, 3, 5 years. They are going to be a true playoff contender for multiple years in a row. I wonder if maybe this year is still not that time just yet, where you see something similar to what the Devils had happened last year. There will be some growing pains in figuring that all out, but I do agree that the future is bright in Montreal if everything stacks up and works out the way it looks like it should.
Yeah, and I think that's what it ultimately comes down to, is just those youth gaining experience, but then you bring in the veteran guys like Patrick Laine to hopefully, cause that spark. So yeah, I'll be interested to see how they go. But Western Conference, Central Division, of course, the Colorado Avalanche, Dallas Stars, and the Nashville Predators. So obviously for Colorado, I don't need to explain this whole point of the podcast as we'll go on and on about going forward. The Stars are an interesting breed because every year, they make a deep playoff run. I don't remember the last time they went out in the first round. And I mean, they're perennial deep runners. I mean, they were in the final with the Lightning not too long ago. They went to the Western Conference final again this year. I believe they lost it in the Western Conference final to Vegas before that. They're a complete team. And as people have said, to quote Hockey Psychology, go watch that channel, by the way, fantastic channel. They're a complete team that can play any kind of game with you. If you want to play one way, they can match that. But they've never been able to get over that hump and win a cup, even though it seems like they should. In fact, they were my pick last year to do it. I really thought they would. They have a true number one in Jake Ottinger, who, despite having a bit of a regression last year, still played fantastically. They have, true number one guys in Jason Robertson, a fantastic prospect pool, as I mentioned earlier, with Wyatt Johnson and Logan Stankoven, and yet they can't win it all. And everybody always expects them to, and yet they never can. People shit on the Avs all the time for the second round exits and things like that, but we still came away with a cup and with an inferior goaltender. Mind you, that 2022 team was the best Avalanche team, I think, to play. But regardless, my question to you, Dom, what do you think is preventing the Dallas Stars from winning that Stanley Cup? Not that I want them to.
Well, I think the important thing is something you said there is they're very good at playing whatever game their opponent sets. And that means they can play up to the opponents that maybe on talent are better than them, but that also means they can play down to opponents that they should beat easily. They can bring their opponents into games at times because they don't necessarily have their Dallas brand of hockey. They have that chameleon style where they will play and they can run with different sides. Unfortunately, you can't just manifest speed. You need to have that speed. And I do think they have a lot of speed on their team, but does it match what McDavid's top speed can be on the Oilers? Can it match what McKinnon and Makar can do? So I think at a certain point, they have to be able to enforce their will and dictate the pace of games if they are going to make that next jump. Now, we have seen over the last couple of years, I know it was previously the Blues who were big rivals of the Avalanche, still a much hated team, but those games were competitive. These days, the Avs have that rivalry locked down. I think replacing the Blues, the Stars have not been kryptonite, but have been that team who can rival or challenge the Avalanche more than others. And that little edge on the Avs is what keeps them in the playoff hunt and in the discussion every year. If the Avs were able to make that jump and win the cup, and the Stars have been able to beat that team or beat similar rosters, they have that potential. It's just whether or not they can live up to it and line it all up together in a single season.
And if you ask me, now I can finally share what I had alluded to about an hour ago now. If you ask me, for one, if Valeri Nichushkin didn't go and do what he did, I do feel like we could have still won that series because I felt like we were in it. But I think the mental toll and impact that they took on everybody, especially since this was the second time in a row, is what truly lost us that series. Especially because players like Casey Middlestat were providing fantastic second-line scoring. He was playing out of his mind, and that was his first playoffs. And lest people forget, Valeri Nichushkin was leading the playoffs in scoring before he had to leave. So, truly, I don't think we would have necessarily lost that series, or at least would have gone to 7, if we wouldn't have had that mental blockage right there. And here's my assertion right now. And you can take me to the bank on this. If the Avalanche have a fully healthy roster with Gabriel Landeskog, Valeri Nichushkin, regardless of your feelings on him, and of course Arturi Lehkonen comes back, but especially if Landeskog and Nichushkin are back, they're winning another Stanley Cup. You can take that to the bank with me. I truly believe that.
And I wouldn't disagree with you. I think, again, the debate comes down is that this year or when does that happen? Because at a certain point, someone will figure out how to defend Edmonton. They have a short window for their specific offense. And I think to answer the question, what do the Stars need to get over the hump? The Stars need to figure out how to beat Edmonton, or they need just a good draw where someone like the Avalanche are pushed down in the rankings behind something like Nashville, so that Dallas can draw that 2-3 matchup against the Predators and then count on a team like the Avalanche to eliminate the Oilers for them. I think, again, you're right with the talent on the Avs. It comes down to a simple question of a coin flip. Is it this year or is it not this year? The talent's there. It's proven. You guys won the cup. I agree with you. It will happen again. Is it this year or not is the coin flip. But if things line up where they're the 4 seed playing Edmonton and then you get a Stars Predators 2-3, that's the type of game that opens the door for both the Avalanche and the Stars, because the Avalanche don't have to deal with the Predators, which I do think might be a surprisingly tough match for them. I think they match up to Edmonton better than other teams, whereas the Stars do match up better to the Predators than they would match up with the Oilers. So I do think at a certain point you can have all this talent and all these teams at the top who are these top playoff teams, they do always distinguish themselves from the rest of the league, but distinguishing themselves from each other sometimes does come into those matchups, and those can be a little bit reading between the lines to pick that out.
Yeah, I think you've summarized that really well. And I agree. I genuinely believe that had shit not gone wrong, which is always the silver lining, isn't it? That the Avalanche could have beaten the Edmonton Oilers team that went to the Cup. And I mean, people are absolutely free to disagree with me. That's the whole point of having the discussion. I believe that that's the case. I think it's a team that, as you just said, we would have matched up against very well. I think it would have been a highly competitive series, and I think we saw that in the regular season. I always like it when we beat Edmonton easily, but that never seems to be the case with the kind of players that they have, on their roster. But regardless, I will keep it moving as I waffle on about the Avs. But to respond quickly to what you said, I said the year that the Avalanche won the Cup, I said they'll win it in the next 5 years no matter what. And strangely, that ended up being the year that they did it. And for the time that we're in right now, the window is of course not closed. And we'll win it this year if, as I said, those pieces fall into place. But I especially think Landeskog coming back is the most important part. When you're missing that leadership on the ice, even if it's in the locker room there, still talking to the guys, it's just not the same. But anyway, I'd like to touch quickly on the rest of them. Nashville, it'll be interesting to see because they've now addressed their power play issues, especially with Stamkos and Marchessault. However, does that help them 5-on-5? I've learned recently that Stamkos 5-on-5 last year regressed heavily. There was a period where he only had one 5-on-5 goal in a month, and his defensive stats have slipped majorly. So while he will greatly aid on what was a terrible Predators power play, can he aid elsewhere on the ice? Not to mention, of course, the age factor. But I think ultimately they will be a more competitive team, especially with Roman Josi at the helm. Fantastic guy. For the Pacific Division, the Vancouver Canucks, I don't anticipate them being any less good than they were last year. You now have a team that's had a full year under the Rick Tocchet system, and frankly, I don't anticipate them regressing really in any way. I think they'll still be great. Quinn Hughes, caught off the back of his first Norris Trophy win. Cale Makar had more points per game. Yeah. Edmonton Oilers, of course. The problem for me with the Pacific Division is it's kind of a weak division. Because you look at the bottom of that division, you have San Jose, Anaheim, Seattle, and Calgary, who didn't make the playoffs last year. And as much as I don't want Vegas to make the playoffs this year, it's likely that they will, because none of the four teams that I just mentioned, I think, have the assets necessary to make the playoffs at all. So really, with the Pacific, it's just about who ends up in one of the four positions. So I do think Vegas will end up being either in that third or wild card spot. And I agree that I think we'll see some regression with Vegas, as much as they like to tout how they run their system with, getting rid of people just to sign big name players, using the LTIR to their advantage. I do think, especially losing Marchessault, that was your Conn Smythe winner. He's gone now. And no, their goaltending really has never been anything overly remarkable to me. But the problem is there's just no one else in the Pacific Division that can really challenge Vegas. As for my wild cards, though, I have Utah maybe sneaking in there into one of the wild card spots, either one or two. And the reason that I did say it could be the Jets, and the reason I've neglected them is the Jets are always competitive because they have a true number one goaltender in Connor Hellebuck. He won the Vezina, rightfully so, but also got his ass lit up in the playoffs by the Avalanche, who absolutely dominated with 5 goals a game. But my problem with the Jets is they did not get better this offseason and arguably got worse because they lost people, didn't add anyone besides Capo Kakinen and net. And they really don't have those true number one guys. I mean, their captain, Adam Lowry, is kind of their big guy on the top line, but I just don't feel like they have what is necessary to overcome and really make that deep playoff push, especially because they didn't do anything to address their problems in the offseason. And then, of
Yeah.
course, yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt you much, but there I will say I agree. The Jets, we do have to remember that they were only 3 points behind the Stars last year, ahead of both the Canucks, the Oilers, and the Avalanche. So that offense, even if it did regress slightly, I think it should still be considered at least on the fringe of a playoff team. But I do agree. As a Sharks fan, having seen Kaapo Kakkonen play in net, he is just the next in a long line of mediocre Sharks goaltenders that are going to start somewhere and probably perform better because they're not in San Jose, and for whatever reason, that is like goaltender kryptonite. But it's not anything special or a real improvement that's going to make them a better team.
And I mean, the reason that the Jets were able to do that is because of their defensive juggernaut status. I mean, if we look at this right here, their goal differential was plus 60, and that's because they only let in 199 goals against, which I believe was the league best. Yeah, I'm correct. It was only one better than the Florida Panthers, but I mean, that's frankly really remarkable that they were, letting in so few goals. But the problem was they only scored 259 goals, so only 60 more goals than what they didn't let in. So it'll be interesting to see if now, with the lack of offense, sure, the defense is still there, but can they then? Because I mean, you can't win a game unless you score. Yeah, you can keep the other team from scoring, but ultimately, in order to win the game, you got to have one more point than the other team. So I will be interested to see how they perform.
I agree, and I do think they have to follow the Panthers' blueprint. The Panthers scored a total of 9 more goals last year and only gave up 1 more goal than the Jets. The Jets got bounced in the first round by the Avs. The Panthers won the whole thing. There is a part of it of showing up in the right moments and having the right guys on the ice and scoring in the moments that matter. Your defense can be great over the season, like you said, but if your goaltending falls asleep in the playoffs and gives up 6 goals in 2 periods, your offense can't keep up with that. So I do agree with the Jets. And really quickly, I love the call out of the Wild. Or if not the Wild, excuse me, the Utah Hockey Club. I would love to talk about them more sometime. I don't know if we'll have that time today, but I do think things are exciting, and that change of scenery, that is a sneaky dark horse club to watch that could definitely be that team to knock the Golden Knights out of their playoff run that they've been on the last couple of years.
I completely agree, and frankly, I'm glad for those guys. They deserve to play in a full NHL arena. The fans of the Coyotes did not deserve to lose their team by any stretch of the imagination, and who knows, we might see more expansions going back to Arizona, just as long as you don't give it to the former owner. That man deserves to never, ever, ever, ever have a hockey team ever again.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree. We do feel for the fans in Arizona, but I think the fresh start, the fresh club, the approach they've taken with the big signings in the off season, and just the way they approached the draft, I think, I mean, having Sergachev is a huge boost. I do think that perhaps that change of scenery and that big highlight addition to have it rally a fan base around, and like you said, having a stadium, a true full size stadium to play in, I think that is an underrated impact. We could talk about this on another episode, but the impact of the lack of fans in the 2020 COVID playoffs and in 2021, I feel like as well there were still limited fans. I feel like that cannot be overstated, how that can have an impact on how a team plays. Some teams play better with the noise, some teams play better in the quiet, and I think Utah is that team that needs a little bit of noise, needs a little bit of excitement, needs some to pop up in some headlines as that underdog, and then they'll really start to shine.
I think you're absolutely right. Well, Dom, I want to give you some chances to talk about our local basement dwellers, the Sharks. So I'm going to call this section Shark Feeding Time. We're going to feed the Sharks. Dom, I'd love to know, besides, of course, Macklin Celebrini, which new Sharks player, could be a prospect trade or signing, are you most excited
for? Well, personally, this one might be an odd take compared to what other Sharks fans would say, but I'm really happy to have the return of Barclay Goodrow. The fact that when he left the Sharks and went to the Lightning to be on multiple Stanley Cup winning teams and the teams he's moved to, then from there to the Rangers, he has been providing that depth, that third line, that fourth line talent, and showing up in the big moments. We saw him in the playoffs last year get that overtime goal for the Rangers in one of their series. I think he is someone who is underrated. He is a homegrown talent who started his career with the Sharks, and I'm really happy to have him back. I was sad to see when he left the first time when we were doing our own salary cap issues because of that horrible Carlson contract that we beyond overpaid and really stunted the team's rebound. I think we do have to put the honorable mention, though, to Tyler Toffoli. If with the talent that he's bringing in, the fact that the Sharks have never given a contract as large or as long to an outside player, I think it's a huge sign by the new leadership to commit to a guy to be that leader in the locker room, to rally the team around, because I mentioned it earlier, but Logan Couture might be our captain, but we might very well not see him play another full season on the ice again. And looking ahead to the future, you need those veteran guys who can guide in Celebrini and even some of the younger guys who started to step up last year. So I know there's a lot of excitement about the prospect pool and what might be coming in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I really do think, just the way you called it now, the Sharks are going to be back in the playoffs in the next 5 years. They were there for most of the 2010s. We got to that cup and just couldn't get over that hump because of playing too much defense and goaltending and couldn't score. I think now that scoring potential is in our prospect pool, what's important is that those veterans guide them in, get them the right opportunities, put them in the right position to succeed. And having someone like Toffoli, who might not be the loudest or most attention-getting guy, but really is consistent and gets the job done, is the right place to start.
Well, I think that statement actually leads me perfectly to my next question. And you touched on it a little bit with your previous answer, but what do you feel, beyond what you've already mentioned, are the necessary next steps now for the Sharks to make in order to get back to the playoffs? And then you kind of already mentioned, but how many seasons away is that?
Well, I think the first step is don't finish last this year. As much as a lottery pick is worth, and we saw that with Celebrini this year, you have that lottery pick. You have Will Smith in the prospect pool as well. You got to pick twice in the first round and get a top tier defenseman who's really going to help. And the reason I mention that is defense. The Sharks, the goaltending has been rough over the last few years. The defense, the turnovers it's been a struggle to watch. And yes, you need to be able to score goals, but you can't be putting yourself in a position where you're giving up and down by 4 goals before the end of the second period. You're just deflating the offense and the potential of the team as a whole when that happens. So I think step one this season is don't finish last and get through the season without Celebrini getting injured. We saw with Bedard, the wonderful talent, but even he missed some time with injury. We really want to try to say, hey, let's get these guys their minutes, let's get them battle tested, but let's try to avoid any serious injuries, because that would obviously hamper the rebuild in the long term. When you've got teams like Anaheim, Chicago, that are in a similar spot, and now Columbus with everything with losing Gaudreau and that tough state the franchise is in, there are teams at the bottom of the pile who they can be beaten. We can finish ahead of them. We get to play the Ducks head to head plenty of times. There is a chance to see 2 young prospect pools go at it, but neither team is ready to go. And the way I see it, the matchups between the Sharks and the Ducks could possibly be a preview of what we see maybe in that 4 or 5 years from now, as we see as a playoff matchup. I think this is the time to try to start winning those games. You're not going to win games against all the playoff teams, and that's okay. Focus on getting through them, focus on the fundamentals. But against teams like the Ducks and the Blackhawks, with their time is not right now, their time is coming in the next couple of years. Those are the games that I want to see the Sharks winning, because if we can beat those teams now, if we continue the growth and the trajectory and match their pace of growth, then we can beat them in 4 to 5 years when they're the competition to worry about.
Yeah, so basically beat the other basement dwellers and utilize that veteran presence to really reestablish those fundamentals.
Yeah, and like I mentioned it with the crowd noise, but I mean, I've been to games and I've been able to get really good tickets in the tank, and the tank is the SAP Center. The tank is quite an experience. It is really a fun place for a hockey game, But if you can't score goals, if you can't win games, it's hard for a fan to go in there and just watch your team get beat at home week after week. So I think if they at least have those games they do win, that's how you get all the excitement back in the franchise. Already we've seen having Celebrini, how many people have showed up to practices and skates and whenever they could see him. And I think it's really good for the franchise as a whole, and it's a good place to reboot from. So now just living up to that and winning those winnable games. And again, I think it can't be stated enough, but trying to avoid the unnecessary injuries, the unnecessary penalties. Fundamentals show the potential there that once all of these guys are at their maximum and are ready to go full-time NHLers, ready to fill in those top two lines and play night in, night out, like you see with the Avs top two lines, that build to that point, because Rome wasn't built in a day and neither will those lines, but the pieces are there. And you mentioned it before, but having a legitimate goalie prospect in Askarov now, that weakness in the pipes, in between the pipes, has always been there. Going through all of these goalies, Martin Jones, and look at how the Kraken are. Aiden Hill is meh and is what we're talking about with the Golden Knights, nothing special. These guys have come in and out of San Jose, and we've been a revolving door for goaltending. One of them has to stick. If it's Askarov, if Blackwood improves, we just need that 1A, and then we can start to look for that 1B, or maybe those two could form a 1A, 1B tandem. But I think those fundamental types of things to keep us from beating ourselves in games. The Sharks can't beat themselves if they're going to want to beat anyone else. They will be the shark bait in their own tank if they can't stop beating themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Quick aside, I want everybody out there to know, I know we're shitting on Aiden Hill a little bit, but I do recognize that he did win a Stanley Cup. So don't get me wrong. Dude was there at the front of the Vegas Golden Knights, but Aiden Hill by no means is an Igor Shesterkin, a UC Saros, who's underrated as hell, by the way. I think most people recognize that. Aiden Hill is Aiden Hill, but he got the bag thrown at him. He's got his name on the Stanley Cup. So, what can I say?
Well, yeah, and I think that's important to note is, like I said, it's not necessarily bad goaltending, but mediocre goaltending. The environment too, and well, that has been the Sharks' problem. We used to have this great defenseman. I remember the days of Brendan Dillon being on the team. I miss Brent Burns so much. He's still one of my favorite players. You know me, Corey. I've been rooting for the Hurricanes for the last few years in the playoffs because I want to see that man's name on the Stanley Cup, even if it's not with my team. And I think Carolina's window is closing, like we talked about, and his chance might very well be gone, especially with his age. But you think about the Karlsson contract and how much that hurt the team and how much we lost in assets in the overall. That was his offense could not make up for the number of goals he let in, as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't necessarily the goalie's fault, be it Aiden Hill or anyone else, when Karlsson couldn't play defense in front of him despite his contract. And we still have Vlasic, who is aging. We gave him that big contract for like 8 years, I think it was, and then 2 years into it, he fell off a cliff with his quality of play, and no one's going to take that contract. So we need that salary cap to increase, but we just need to get in these younger prospects, these good defensemen who aren't expensive right now, so that we have that chance. And by the time those old contracts, once we're no longer paying dead money on them, then we can re-sign and put some new prospects, put someone like Mario Ferraro. He's going to be an assistant captain for every game this year. I'm glad to see that the organization is recognizing him, and basically he's serving as Couture's backup and would be the effective captain with that C if Couture is not in. I think having some other guys on defense to build around him, we went from having 5 D-men who could be on a top 2 lines, 5 or 6, and we were able to roll those lines, and that's how we got to the Stanley Cup in 2016. But now it really is just Ferraro. There's not much else to talk about there. So again, fundamentals, defense, seeing someone like Macklin Celebrini, can he be a 200-foot center? That would be really great to see to help us on our defensive end.
I don't want to dive down the rabbit hole right now, but I'd love to talk about it with you more later, that Karlsson contract, or just Karlsson in general. Such an interesting critter. And yeah, I do want to touch on him more, but I want to keep us moving here. Speaking of Macklin, do you think, obviously barring any major injuries, do you think Macklin Celebrini locks up the Calder, or do you think that there are other prospects and rookies that people should watch out for to maybe kind of sneak in and steal that from?
I think this is where the Homer comes in for me, I think he should be the front runner for the Calder. We saw what he was able to do, and he was let's not forget that he was younger than and smaller than as well than some of the guys he was playing against in college, and he just was absolutely redonkulous with the stats. Like I have to use redonkulous. It is impressive. The talk of living up to the possibility, just like the talk with Bedard last year of that one player per year and that those generational type talents. It is the Sharks need him to be our Connor McDavid, our Nathan McKinnon, or Cale Makar as the Avs have. That is what the franchise needs from him, and the fact that he has been so cool, calm, and collected and mature for his age, I think if anyone can handle it, I do think he is set up in a good position to handle it, especially with, I mean, his dad is literally with the Warriors or has been with that organization before. So he is a hometown kid. He's got all the support around him in the world. I mean, the kid is literally bunking with Joe Thornton this season to get that mentorship from Jumbo Joe, a San Jose favorite, a consummate professional that I personally believe should be considered at least for the Hall of Fame just for how his longevity and his talent over those years. I think Celebrini is in a really good position to be that front runner and to secure the Calder.
All those Bruins fans out there, never forget, you gave up Joe Thornton. Anyway, it's kind of incredible to me that despite it not even being the regular season, we have so much to talk about, which is frankly pretty great. Lets me know that I don't think we'll ever be able to stop yapping going forward. So that's a great sign. But with that being said, I definitely still wanted to hear your power rankings. And then I think I'd love to know some players people should look out for this season. So hit me with those 32 power rankings, Tom. I need to know what you think.
All right, so I'll just run through them really quick, at least for the first 16, because I have already given those. So I have the Florida Panthers at number 1, like I said, then Edmonton Oilers, the New York Rangers, and the Dallas Stars. I think realistically, the Florida Panthers, Edmonton Oilers, and New York Rangers, that should be your top tier. Those should be locks. They should not be missing the playoffs in my book for any reason. I really don't see their key players getting injured, and I do think they have more depth in those places sometimes than they get credit for, that they could make it to the playoffs anyway. And just one tier below that, just barely a tier below that, I think they are right in that conversation. I expect them to make the playoffs, or where I had the Stars, Avalanche, Predators, and Canucks. And I think you throw the Bruins in that as well, just like you said. So that gets you our 1 through 8 right there. Next on the list, the next 8 is where we're talking about those third team, and then we're talking wild cards. I see the Jets, the Hurricanes, the Maple Leafs, and the Devils are my 9 through 12. I do think there's room to move there. I agree the Devils could very well finish ahead of the Hurricanes. I do have the Hurricanes ahead of them now. I put the Maple Leafs at 11. I agree they are most likely going to make the playoffs this year, but I wonder if it matters if they continue to get bounced in the first round.
I think Craig Berube was a great sign as a coach, and I do think he'll be able to make an impact, at least in the playoffs, just like he did with the Blues. I mean, he led that team that was a bottom team, literally last place, all the way to a Stanley Cup championship. So it's not that the Toronto Maple Leafs ever have any issues in the regular season. It's just, can they get over that hump in the playoffs? I do think Craig Berube can really help with it.
Right, and I guess maybe call it a curse, call it what you want. I think I need to see it to believe it with Toronto at this point.
That is so
when you've
fair.
talked about being let down, I think I've been let down by Toronto a few times. If you recall our brackets, I think I've picked them on more than one occasion in the last 5 years to at least win a round. So I do want to see more before I move them up a little bit higher in the power rankings. That 13 through 16, this and really 17 through 20, I think this is the interesting area where you're talking about that fringe, those wild card battles. So in order, we have the Golden Knights, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Red Wings, and the Kings as 13 through 16. With 17 through 20, I do have the Pittsburgh Penguins on the outside looking in, the Capitals, the Utah Hockey Club, and the Islanders. And I will talk more about this with players to watch, but I think the Penguins and Capitals could be interesting storylines this year for different reasons, but with the same premise. I really do like your take, and I hope to move Utah Hockey Club up in my rankings and have them as a playoff team by the end of the season. Seeing what they did as Arizona last year left a lot to be desired. They were a ways away, so I can't put them automatically into a playoff seeding
But
spot.
they had those flashes. They had those flashes.
They have the splashes, and that's why they're just on the outside looking in that maybe we'll see them there, maybe we won't tier. I think just below that, you do still have those potential teams that could make it to the playoffs, but I don't necessarily expect this year to be the year. And that's where I have the Sabres, the Calgary Flames, the Canadiens, and the Senators. I think I do expect improvement from most of the Canadian teams this year. I do think I think Calgary is a little bit better than they get credit for. I agree with you on your take on Montreal from earlier. Ottawa's physical and always just a hard one to predict, and I feel like they can play teams close. So these teams, I don't necessarily expect them to make the playoffs, but I do think there's an X factor they have that puts them ahead of the next four. And that next four where it's not a dumpster fire, but it ain't pretty. Maybe it's just a kitchen trash can. Because the St. Louis Blues and Minnesota Wild, they gave me nothing to feel confident in last year. And I think with the young talent on the Blackhawks, the Ducks, the Sharks, I mean, those teams could be the dumpster fires we're talking about by the end of this season. There's not a lot of morale. There's not a lot to rally around there. I don't see them being consistent. I don't see them getting much better. With the Blues in particular, seeing Jordan Binnington constantly throwing tantrums on the ice, it makes for good Hollywood TV, but not for good hockey. So I don't expect either of them to be in the playoffs. This one and I should say the same goes for the Kraken. The Kraken, I have them at 28. They exemplified what we expect from an expansion team. You expect some growing pains. You expect it to be a slow start, a slow burn. It certainly was for the Sharks in their origin, which is what made the Vegas Golden Knights so frustrating and unique when they first came into the league. So I would lump the Kraken in with the Wild and Blues there. And the final team in that tier, that 25 through 28, I have the Philadelphia Flyers at 27. I know you're high on them and see them as a potential playoff team. And with the way the East is, you are totally correct. It is so wide open they could. You're going to see a lot more teams from the West here towards the bottom. I think the West is top heavy and bottom heavy. There's that clear divide, whereas the East, it's always a bit more wide open. But the Flyers have not given me something that I feel confident in. I feel like they've been on the fringes, but they've been missing that edge for a while. Yeah, they had 87 points, but they were still behind the Penguins, Capitals, and Red Wings, and then that's behind the next real jump, and the Islanders can go in that batch as well. So I think when you're at the bottom of a tier of like 6 teams, I don't know if they can make that jump. I see them going backwards more than forwards.
I mean, yeah, it's totally a fringe pick. They got so close last year that I feel like there's a chance, but I totally understand what you mean.
Well, and you just sometimes have those teams that call it management, ownership, coaching. I don't know what the real answer to their problem is, but I just see them as that team where they're going to get oh so close and then let you down. They are the Toronto Maple Leafs of the regular season, rather than the playoffs. Like they can get there, they can make you think that they're there, but they'll find a way that by the season's end that they will miss the playoffs. And you know, as teams do get better, as the Canadiens get better, if we're moving Utah up, if these younger teams, if the Devils are moving up compared to where they were last year, they finished behind the Flyers. Ultimately, that does shift the Flyers down, even if they haven't necessarily done anything wrong. It's just that they haven't done something right that makes me think they are worthy of being ranked higher. Now, obviously, I hope to change these power rankings as time goes on, but at least as an initial attempt, I just don't see it right now. Maybe with more preseason games or once the regular season starts, we'll see something that I can feel a bit more confident in. But yes, now down to dumpster fire tier. You mentioned it. I love my San Jose Sharks to the end of the earth.
Basement dwellers.
And the basement dwellers, I do have them ranked as 32 to start the season. We couldn't win games to save a life last year, to save anyone's life. I mean, it was horrifyingly bad. I remember calling you or texting you when we were like, we broke 10 wins. Like, oh my God, I didn't know if that was going to happen. And that was so sad. Even if the team makes the leap with all of the young talent this year, they need more than one leap. So I do have them at 32. Again, right ahead, I have the Ducks. I think the Ducks and the Sharks are in a similar space. And I really think the two of them and the Blackhawks, who I have at 30, I think they could finish ahead, like I said, of the Wild, the Blues, the Kraken by season's end if those young prospects show up. But going off of last year and just having prospects but not having them gel as a team and see them on the ice, I have to put those as the bottom three. And this is where I want to call it the Columbus Blue Jackets. I have them at 29. And for all intents and purposes, everything we saw last year, they scored 66 points on the season. That was good for, I think, fourth worst in the league. So that's where I have them ranked here. I do think those teams behind them with the Ducks, the Blackhawks, and the Sharks could get better and could pass them. And the Jackets just lost Johnny Gaudreau. And they've just, that organization needs some help. But I do think there is the potential for them to shine. It's, you diamonds are made in the rough, right?
Under pressure.
Under pressure. You have this opportunity that there are these massive skates to fill. A city, a team is hurting. There is something to rally around. Those type of storylines, that psychological element is an X factor that can't be accounted for in any like numerical statistic. We've seen with other teams when they are playing for something across all sports, different leagues, you see that guys will play better than their talent. Teams will outplay their individual talent. They will outperform what their roster really should be capable of. And when those rosters get split up and guys get new contracts after the fact, you see that they're actually not that good. But for that one season, that one group together, they were able to outperform expectations. I think Columbus's expectations are so low this year that they could surprise. I don't by any means think they could be a playoff team, but could they finish the year maybe like at the 24 spot or the 25 spot, move up a little bit, have some crazy upset wins over quality playoff teams, and then turn around the next game and get blown out by the Wild, for example? I think that's absolutely a possibility. They could lose the games they should win and win the games they should lose and be a very polarizing and interesting team to rally around this year. So I have them ahead of the three rebuilds, but I think they have that potential to jump further up or fall and be the clear last place team this year that the Sharks were last year.
Well, I really think sports are made for moments like this, and I don't think any hockey fan out there, despite it being, Columbus, Ohio, would be sad if that was something that unfolded. But I think the unfortunate part as well that when you were going through it, is that someone always has to be in last. There are 32 teams, and no matter what, somebody has to be number 32.
Yep, it is inevitable. There will always be a last place team. There will always be a first place team. But we've also seen, will the first place team during the season finish as the first place team after the playoffs? There's that reset, and I think that's what we also speak to with Toronto. That their question, jumping back to them, is when that reset happens in the playoffs, are they able to turn themselves into that number one team as opposed to whatever seed they were before? I think that's how I feel about the Jackets. Their whole season is like their playoffs. They have nothing to lose, no expectations, which means the sky is the limit for what they could accomplish. They just have to go out there and take it.
I think you're nothing but correct. And I mean, we've seen it both ways. As much as I like to grumble about it, look at the Edmonton Oilers' absolute slide at the beginning of last season, made it all the way to the final. So you really never know.
Yeah, absolutely. But now that I've wrapped those power rankings and I know we're trying to wrap up tonight soon, the Sharks, we know that there's a lot to be seen, so I don't necessarily want to spend so much time on them tonight. I'd rather like to talk about them as we actually start to see the team form on the ice once the season starts. So rather than that, I would just like to throw out some storylines, some questions to look at for the season, a couple players to highlight. And that first one for me, I think I pretty sure I sent this to you already previously when you asked me for a different question, but the old timers that are still going strong. Pavelski has retired, and I want to talk about him as well in a little bit for a different reason. But the old timers that are still in the league, Sidney Crosby, over the last 2 seasons, he has quietly put up 90 regular season points in back-to-back seasons. He had not done that any time previously in his career. It is some of the best and most consistent hockey at an age when we see other players are starting to show their decline. His raw talent, his hockey sense, and his longevity to go that long without an injury, while still continuing to perform at an elite level, it is what keeps Pittsburgh, I think, relevant. Without that, you would see where I have Philadelphia and Pittsburgh in the rankings, you could flip them, or you could just throw Pittsburgh right next to Philadelphia and just say Pennsylvania is not your year for hockey. But because of Sidney Crosby, that X factor, I mean, the fact that, again, he went for a decade. I mean, he scored at least 80 points every year. But the fact that for the first time in his career, he has back-to-back 90-point seasons now at his age, like, I think it's something that maybe is going a little unnoticed or unappreciated in league circles. And there's so much focus on McDavid and McKinnon and Makar, and it is totally fair. They are the young, exciting prospects. But that was what Sidney Crosby once was. There were times he was touted as possibly being the next great one, that next Gretzky. And I don't know if there ever is that next Gretzky, but he has been that staple of a consistent player. And he's been in the league a long time, and he keeps the Pittsburgh Penguins relevant. He keeps them in that playoff conversation where, again, just last year, missing out by just a couple points on 88, and the Capitals were on 91. As were the Red Wings, of course, but still, you're talking about close in that playoff hunt in a wide open East. So I think it'll be important to watch and see how Crosby continues to play this year. If he can follow that up and have yet another 90-point season and keep playing some of his best hockey, especially as he's evolved to improve his game with assists as well. I think that helps the other players around him and their growth, and that's part of what can keep Pittsburgh relevant, even if they're not phenomenal. The other old timer I want to call out.
Hold on. I want to say, first of all, Sidney Crosby is the next Jaromir Jagr. He's going to play till he's 52, I swear. But
would love to see that.
You're exactly right. And in my mind, Sidney Crosby is top 5 players all time. And I think he's done plenty to prove that. And I think he'll only cement that as he continues to wrap up his career. But to expand upon his points, he's tied a Gretzky record for 19 point per game seasons. Every single season, he has had at least a point per game. Exactly as you said, he scored over 80 points every year, which is frankly remarkable whenever anybody catches a Gretzky record. And it really wouldn't surprise me if he ended up beating the record this year. I think he knows how to take care of himself the right way. And frankly, it shatters my heart that he re-signed with Pittsburgh, because I know everyone deep down, even Pittsburgh fans, said if he went to any other team, they'd want him to go to the Avalanche to play with his best friend, Nathan McKinnon. I was definitely one of those people who wanted to see that. And who knows? Trade deadline acquisition, you never know, because that would definitely help his team, get some prospects, get some picks. Then maybe it's just a rental. He can go right on back. I couldn't say, but I agree with everything that you just said.
Well, and I think you're right. He is a locker room presence. And I mean, the fact that he is in that realm with Gretzky, he is one of the greatest hockey players we've ever seen, possibly the greatest of his generation. Or maybe we should say probably the greatest, not even possibly.
Probably.
I wonder if he gets another chance at a cup if he stays in Pittsburgh.
I think
their hope is that, I mean, when they had him and Malkin, and that's what they were running around, and they kept trying to build around it, and they could never figure that build out. But with the hope that his presence can make the people around him better, I don't think it'll happen if he stays with Pittsburgh for the remainder of his career. But either way, he has still been showing out, and regardless of how well the team does, he has been, in a team sport, he's been able to show out as an individual consistently over his career. And I think it's important to watch and see if that continues, because you're right, he could keep playing. This could go on. He could do the same type of thing for another decade if he keeps taking care of himself.
I mean, if the Penguins make the playoffs, it'll strictly be off of Sidney Crosby's back. I mean, he almost did it by himself last year. So yes, while he does impressive things as an individual, I think that speaks to his quality as a team player because he saddles the team up on his shoulders just to carry them through. Not to mention he just took $8.7 million again, which he has done his entire career, which is so interesting in a league where we're seeing people get rightfully paid $14 million. And Sidney Crosby, who is one of the best, could easily be making upwards of $10 to $12 million, is instead choosing to take that because he would rather the rest of that money go towards his team, which is frankly remarkable to see and a great example set.
It's a true class act, and in a way, the last of a generation. I think the best example I can think of offhand, but call out, is looking to the NFL and what Tom Brady did with the Patriots. He is probably the greatest football player of all time. I know everyone's on the Patrick Mahomes hype, but what Brady did in his career is
This is a hockey podcast. Don't talk about the Chiefs.
Yeah, you're right. But just calling out Brady, who the Chiefs hate, he did that all while taking a pay cut. He was, I don't think at any point in his career, the highest paid quarterback in the league. So the real great ones, the true greats, understand that it's about building a team and really care more about that winning than they do about their individual stat line. And that's why I call it out, as he has still continued to put up the individual stat line while putting the team first over and over again. It is truly an amazing feat and really impressive. But I want to transition over to one of the other veterans from this generation, like Crosby, who is in the realm of a Gretzky record, and that is Alex Ovechkin. Unlike Crosby, Ovi has shown some decline over the past few seasons. However, he remains only 41 goals away from tying the great one at 894 regular season goals. So that is reachable. I don't know how much longer Ovechkin has in him. We're seeing it. He's not putting up the points the way Crosby is consistently year in, year out. For 3 straight seasons, he has been in decline with his output. But last year, he still scored 31 goals.
And that was in the back half of the season. He didn't score anything for like the first 40 games, and then suddenly he explodes.
Exactly. So if he can do that in the back half of the season, he only needs 10 more of those chances that just take a good bounce or that just find the gap and slip into the net. And then he's at the great one. So can he score 42 goals this season? I think that's something that I don't know if everyone's focused on, but there should be a tracker, a countdown, because if it's not this season, then we should be talking about it or building it up for next season. If he scored 31 goals last season and that was in half the season, and he's only 41 away from one of the most monumental storylines in the NHL, we should be talking about this. People should be watching it. Again, I think Crosby has done a better job with his longevity of his career than Ovechkin has. And you just see it. I think Crosby's a little bit faster. He's still a little bit sharper. But Ovechkin is no slouch. He is up there in this conversation with Gretzky as well for a reason. And while I might not be the highest on Washington's chances, I feel like they exemplify mediocre in an East that is, you need to be a little bit more competitive to make that final wildcard spot. You need to be like competitive mediocre. I think that's a storyline to watch, that regardless of how Washington does, that individual stat line would be, again, monumental to catch. I mean, again, we're talking a Gretzky record. Like that is something that we should be talking about. And for those of you who don't know hockey, please, I guarantee you there are some documentaries. Take some time and look into the great one, Wayne Gretzky, and why he is the only player to have his jersey retired across the whole NHL. His stats, his ability, the things he did in his time is really unheard of, and we may never see again. So the fact that these guys, it's a big deal to see them catch up even in just one category. And if we could see both of them happen in a single season, if Crosby beats that goals per game number and Ovechkin beats the overall goals, that would be quite a feat to see both happen in one season.
Well, with that being said, I'd like to recommend a book, 99 Stories of the Game by, obviously Wayne Gretzky, but Christy McClellan Day. Fantastic read. Talks about Wayne Gretzky's life, as well as hockey in general. So great for hockey history, if that's what you're interested in. The Gretzky stat I'll always drop on people who are learning about hockey is you could take away every goal that Gretzky ever scored, and he would still have the all-time points record by a very, very large margin.
Yeah, he was one of a kind. But I know as we're trying to start wrapping up here, I do want to call out one other storyline. And again, for today, I want to focus on some of those the veteran storylines that sometimes go a little unheard of. I know we're in this preseason and there's a lot of excitement about prospects, but I'd rather get into some of those more. And so in the future, perhaps in our next pod, I would like to talk about some of those young, speedy, offensive defensemen, if you will, like the Cale Makar, like Quinn Hughes. Can Thomas Harley build on his breakout season in Dallas last year? Can Josh Morrissey bring that to Winnipeg after a strong showing last year? I think there's more to talk about there, and we can look forward to that next week. But for tonight, I would like to say my final talking point is
Dom likes the old guys, everybody.
Well, that's what happens. I'm nostalgic for a time that's going past. I'd like to talk about them now so I can settle it and move on. But I do have to give them their due. And as I've mentioned earlier, you might have heard that a favorite player of mine is Joe Pavelski, and that he has in fact retired. A great hockey personality and a one of a kind deflection artist in the front, in the middle, in the center, in all those dirty areas. His hand-eye coordination is absolutely incredible, always being a presence at the front of the net, night in, night out, in a highly competitive surrounding areas too, where it gets super physical. Still have that hand-eye coordination and the amount of time he practiced to be able to have so many deflections for goals and tips. It netted him, no pun intended, many spectacular tip and rebound goals. That work ethic and that time he spent, and the fact that his leadership, that talent and that work ethic, I imagine it will be missed in Dallas this year, and that is my one concern with them as a playoff team. They were certainly missed when he left San Jose. That is when the decline truly started for our franchise out there. But not so much focused on him because he is hanging up the skates for good. The question is now, who will be the next Joe Pavelski? Who I want to see as this season, and something I want to pay attention to as the year goes on, looking at candidates, who are those guys who are going to be for their team that next man up, who's going to go to the physical areas. But not only that, they're going to spend time on their own in practice and in training their reflexes and in working on their hand-eye coordination. Who's going to show that commitment to leadership and practicing to walk the walk rather than just talking the talk, and be the one who stands unafraid in front of the net time and time again, where you're going to get hit by sticks, you're going to get cross-checked, you're going to get hit by pucks. But if you practice at it enough, you'll make some incredible redirections, some deflections that can change the whole momentum of games. It's a stat that we don't really have necessarily a great stat for, but it is something that is key to. I know you mentioned it earlier tonight, Corey, but getting to those dirty areas, mucking it up, and winning those battles. Part of winning those battles is being able to win the deflections. So I want to see with any title, with any crown, with any skill set, when the best retires, who's going to step up and take that mantle? And so I don't necessarily have a player to highlight for that right now. I'm excited to track and see who are those type of players, or who is that next generation, that next group who step in and fill in that role on their teams, because I think that is an unspoken role that can make all the difference.
Well, Dom, I think that is a lovely thought to leave us off on. And as you can all see, we clearly had a lot to say to endear ourselves to you. Going forward, once the actual games pick up across the season, I will be taking furious notes every time the Avalanche are playing on notable events, highlights, things that I think are important, hopefully things that maybe go unrecognized by some of the media, but who knows how good I'll be at that. But at the conclusion of every episode, I want to share either a fun fact about hockey or a Avalanche story. And fortunately, I didn't have quite enough time to garner a good Avalanche story, although I have plenty of reading material that I can pull from going forward in the future. But I do have my fun fact for today, and it's to follow up on our previous conversation on names on the Stanley Cup. So, in order for a player's name to get onto the Stanley Cup, first and foremost, your team, of course, needs to win it. And it is the hardest trophy in sports to win. I know Dom would agree with me on that point, yes?
Absolutely. It truly is. And if you don't believe us and just think we're hockey fans and we don't value other sports as much, just go ask someone who has taken a statistics class to run the numbers and actually do the calculation. Nerd out about it if you really want to doubt us, and just see for yourself that how much harder it is to win the Stanley Cup than it is to win other championships.
Exactly right. However, after you've won, that player would have needed to appear in at least 41 regular season games for their club or play in one Stanley Cup final game. And there are over 3,400 names engraved on the cup or its rings. So there you go. Well, Dom, thank you so much for sticking it out with me. Obviously, we ran double our initial estimates, but it was a fantastic time. And frankly, I look forward to next week, honestly.
I am as well. Thank you so much for having me on, Corey. I look forward to doing this with you going forward, and hopefully we can keep this up week in, week out, and yeah, maybe keep to our timeline a bit better. So I do want to make a quick shout out to my girlfriend Paige for always being supportive, since we ran an hour longer than what I initially estimated for her. So, the support team behind the scenes allowing us to be able to do this. And I do want to thank you, Corey, for all the work you've put to have this all come together. So I really appreciate you having me on, and yeah, look forward to doing this again.
Thank you for having such great insights, and send my apologies to Paige. I don't have an outro written, but I'll say this. This has been the Captain Avalanche Fancast. I'm Corey.
And I'm Dom.
Thank you so much for stopping in and listening.